Hello friends, welcome back to our channel Demystify Frontend, and this is yet another video in the series Build Your Own Angular Forms, where we are creating Angular form package from the scratch. Since we started with the ngModel implementation and we saw how we implement the two-way data binding and how we handle the two-way data binding scenarios for different type of controls, and then we move to the validation scenarios like how ngModel validate the data. So in the last few videos we have been talking around the validations, synchronous validation, like how ngModel validate the data in a synchronous fashion. Now async validation is more or less it's the same thing, but the validation here requires might require doing some asynchronous operation like calling an API or doing something in an async fashion. Okay, means the validation result is not available immediately, rather we will get the validation result in some point in time. That's why it is asynchronous in nature. So the process by which ngModel validates the data, it is same, either it is synchronous validation or async validation. So it's just about few differences which I will highlight in this flow diagram. So first of all, as you saw in the last videos, if you have been following me, so here, so this is the flow diagram from the last few videos where we discussed, let me minimize it a bit. So here we discussed about how ngModel validate your data, right? First of all, here you define the validation directives which you apply here on the host element where you applied your ngModel directive, and you also register these directives on this provider ngValidator, and ngModel inject this di token, and through this di token it has access to all the validation directives, and through those directives it can compose a single validator function and assign it to the form control. Now form control is the real thing where the actual validation takes place. Means whenever ngModel sync the updated data with the form control will validate that data and update all the flags like valid, invalid or errors, which we can consume in the template to show and hide the errors. Alright, so now let me show you how the async validation differs from the sync validation. So it's all about the differences in the interfaces and this di token. Now since ngModel should inject not only the synchronous but also async validation, so to identify the async validation separately, so Angular basically create this di token. So we will be creating the same ng async validators, and the flow will be the same. You will define the async validation directives and you will register those directives on this di token as a service, and ngModel will inject this async validator ng async validators di token, and again it will get access to all the validation directives, array of validation directives, and through that it will compose a single validator function, that is async validator function, and it can assign it to the form control, so that when the ngModel update the data, update the value on the form control, it will not only validate the data with the synchronous validation but it will also run the async validator function. Okay, and all the asynchronous validation directives, they will follow a different interface, that is async validator. So let's start with the implementation of asynchronous validation directives here, and for that first we will implement how async validation directive looks like, what it accepts and what it returns. So we will define our async validator interface first of all. So let's move to the code, and if you have not checked out the code, you can clone this repo. You will find the link in the description, and just follow me. So down under the source forms, source directives, we have this validator.ts. Okay, so here we have kept all our validations, right? So basically you will find the interface here, validator. So this is the interface which all the synchronous type of validations basically follow, which basically takes the control. So control is the same which we have shown in the diagram. This is the form control which holds the value, right? So on each validation directive, ngModel calls this validate method, and ngModel provides the instance of form control, right? As you know, the form control is created by the ngModel itself in the template driven forms. In reactive form you have access to the form API like form control, form group, everything. But with ngModel, ngModel keeps ngModel create the form control and it keep it close to itself, like within it, and expose some flags like valid, invalid, errors from there, which you can consume by exporting the ngModel in the template. Okay, so we will define our interface, which will basically define how async validation directive looks like. So what I'll do, I'll just simply copy it and paste it here, and I'll make the changes. So rename it to async validator. So this validate method should be present. This should be implemented by all the async validation directives, and it will also take the form control of type abstract control. But now since this validate method is doing some async operation, right? So it is not going to return the results, means the validation errors immediately. Rather, it will return the promise or an observable, right? Which will resolve or reject with this value. So the return type will be either an observable or a promise, right? And we specify what value this observable or promise will give us back, either null if everything is fine, data is valid, otherwise we will get the validation errors, right? Validation error, what is validation errors? This is a simple key value pair, right? All right, so let's go back to the diagram. So since we have this interface in place, now let's define some validation directives. All right, so we will go to the app module. We have this app component there, and here I can define one validation directive, forbidden names, right? So this directive will check if the name we enter is, if it is allowed or not. Okay, and let's define the class here. So this directive should implement the async validator. Okay, let's quickly implement it. All right, so first we will try with the promise. Okay, so let's return a promise here. Whatever value we have through this form control, we will check. If it is Tom, then it's an invalid name, so we will return the error, right? So simply check if, and we will do this in a async fashion, so we will make this check inside a timer. Okay, so let's create a timer and give it some time, let's say 2 seconds. And here I will check if control dot value is equals to, let's say, Tom, then we can return something, um, let's say invalid name, or let's say forbidden name. And we can say true, otherwise we can return null. Okay, so this is our async validation. This is how it looks like. So it will implement this async validator interface, and which will, okay, so we have defined our validate method right here. Now what is the next thing? Let's go back to the diagram. And the next thing is, like, we have to register this we have to register this directive which we have created on this DI token ng async validators, right? So let's first define the async validators in DI token. So if you go here, if you come here at line number 20, we have already defined the DI token for the synchronous validation. This is used in the synchronous validations. So this is a new token which we created now, ng async validators, where all our async validation directives will be registering. Okay, so what type of directive it will return when ngModel inject it? It will return the asynchronous validation, which implements this interface, async validator, right? And we also rename here in the description. Okay, all right, let's go back to the diagram. So we have defined our directives which implement this async validator interface. We have defined this DI token also. Now is the time to register this directive on this DI token. So let's do that. Let's go back to the app component. And do you know how you register a directive on a DI token? Simply provide it in the provider's configuration, right? So mention the DI token here, ng async validators. Okay, so when ngModel inject this DI token, what it will get? It will get instance of this directive and all such directives which register themselves on this DI token. So we will use existing, and we can provide the name of this class. All right. Okay, let's go back to the diagram. So we are here, we have registered our directive forbidden names on this async validation on this ng async validator DI token. Now comes the another step where ngModel will basically inject this DI token, and it will get access to this to all the validation directives which we have applied and registered on this DI token. Get back to code. Now let's move to the ngModel. So search for ngModel here, and let's say, so you can see here we when we worked with when we implemented the support of synchronous validation, we injected this DI token, right? So we will be repeating the same thing, but now for the async validation we will be injecting it. So let's break it down to the next line. Let's format it. Yeah, all right. So if you're following me in the last few videos, as you can see, when we implemented the support of synchronous validation, how we injected this DI token ng validators, right? So this will give us access to all the validation directives, all the synchronous validation directives applied on our form element, right? In the similar fashion, we will inject another DI token which will give access to all the async validators. All right, so let's capture it into a different variable, async validators. All right, so let's import it. Now there is one more thing. So we expect this DI token will give us an array of validator, not validator but async validator. But there is one thing which we have not done yet. So if you go back to the app component, yes, so this will always give us a single directive on this DI token when it is injected, right? So we have to make it a multi-provider DI token so that multiple directives can register on this. And when multiple directives can register on this, in the ngModel we will get an array of async validators, right? So go back, provide this key here, so multi true. Okay, so now this key multi true, it will make it as a it will mark this DI token as a multi provider DI token. That means multiple validation directives can register for this DI token. So now let's do one thing. Let's console what we are getting here, right? In this variable async validators, right? So we must get our validation directive instance here. Okay, so first let's see. Okay, everything seems to be fine, nothing is breaking here. What we need to do, so first thing we will have to add this directive in the app module, right? So go to app module and declare it here. Okay, let's import it. And what else do we need to do? Do we need to export anything from the forms here? So this is our forms module which we have imported in the app module. So we export whatever we want to export, all the directives, services, everything, right? So as you can see, we are exporting ngModel and all the control value accessor directives and some synchronous validation directives like required, min length. All right. So let's see how it is working. So let's, okay, we will have to apply the validation. Yes, how can I forget that? So what is the selector? So this is the selector, and let's go to the app component. So we will apply this directive on the first name input here. Okay, so let me format it a bit. Okay, so now it is in better shape. Now you can see what all properties directives I have applied on this first name input. So basically we have applied couple of directives here. If you see the required and the min length, so we will be applying our async validation directive also here, and that is forbidden names, forbidden name. Okay, now again I am committing some mistakes here, so you have to give it as an attribute. Okay, and let's give it in a camel case. All right, forbidden name, forbidden, I will name it forbidden names. Okay, so apply it here. Now let's see, is ngModel able to retrieve it? Let's refresh it. What we are getting? We are getting null. No. Yeah, so we are getting this, right? So we injected that di token, right? Let's go back to the diagram again. So in the ngModel, what we did, we injected ng AsyncValidator di token, and whatever async validation directives are applied on the input element or on any of the form element, they will register themselves on this, and ngModel will get access to those directives for each of the form element wherever ngModel is applied. But since we have not applied it anywhere else, we have applied it only here on the first name, so we are getting forbidden names. This is our directive, right? That's it. And it must have the method also, that is validate, this one. Okay, easy. Okay, so as you saw, we have got access to the async validations as well, along with the synchronous validations. So what we are going to do next, like we composed a single validator function on the array of synchronous validator directive, right? So in the similar fashion, we will be defining our composed async validator function from the array of async validators directive, and we will ultimately apply it onto the form control which ngModel has created here. Okay, so okay, so let's define our composed async validator function. Let's copy it, paste it here, and let's rename it to composed async validator function. Okay, now this is not going to be like exactly the validator function, because the validator function will always return the validation error in a synchronous fashion, but since it's a async function, so it will give us the, either it will give us an observable or a promise which will reject or resolve with these values, validation errors or null. So basically let's define our async validator function here. So copy it, paste it here, and rename it. So what it will return, it will return either a promise which resolve or reject with these values, or an observable. I hope you are aware of promise and observables. All right, so let's go back to the ngModel and replace it with async validator function.
Okay, so the next thing we will do is define our compose async validator function from the injected asynchronous validation directives, right? Which we have captured in this variable async validators. So what we will do, we will define one more method like we did for the synchronous validation. So this is our sync validator where we defined our composed validator function. So what it basically does, it simply iterate over the list of the validation directives injected inside the ngModel, and we call the validate method on each of the directive and pass the control to each of the directive. Okay, and so this control is our form control which ngModel created when it was initialized for the first time, and it basically keep the value of the form element in sync with this control. So when we pass this to the validate method, the validation directive can read the updated value from the control and make the validation accordingly. All right. So let's do the same thing for our async validator also. So what we will do, let's define the function here. And what I will do, I will just copy it from here and I'll paste it here and I'll make the required changes. So first of all, I'll rename the function to async validator, and this will go into the composed async validator. All right. And yes, the return type will be observable. So replace this with the observable. Okay. So now what happens? This is going to be of type async validator actually. Okay. Now we don't get errors immediately, rather we get observables, right? Observable or promises. But why I'm assuming like all the validation directives are going to return us observables. So I'm not assuming it. We will basically normalize the promise and observables into the observables, right? So that we can subscribe to a single observable. So basically what I'll do here, uh, so what this error is all about, let me check. Okay. So another thing is like this validator is basically is an array of async validators. So let's update it here as well. Async validator. Okay. Yeah. And now when we call the validate, it will return. If you hover over the validate method, you will see it return either a promise or an observable. So what we will have to do, we will have to convert this into the observable, right? So we can define our method to observable, yes. So let's define this utility. Let's define this utility here itself. So let's define this function to observable, which takes a value and which returns an observable. Okay. So what it does basically, now value can be, let's assume any, and so first basically we will check if, so if it is a promise, then there must be some method like 10 on this. So if it is a promise, then we will convert it into an observable, and to convert a promise to an observable, there is a utility from provided by RxJS. Okay, and we will pass this value, and otherwise this is already an observable, so we can simply return it as it is. Okay, and let's import this from. All right. Okay, so there this. Let me correct it. All right, so this is our to observable utility, which will convert a promise into an observable. Now let's go back to the async validator function, and so this is our observable. Now the next thing is basically we will have to. So we are not going to return the array of observable. So this is an array of observable, right? But we are rather we are going to return a single observable, which our phone control can subscribe to. So let's call the fork join, pass it the array of observables here. So this will return the single observable, right? So this will give us the single observable.
And this observable, what it is going to return, this observable will give us the array of errors, right? Since each of the validate method, if you see here in the async validator, what we are receiving here in the return, we are getting a promise and observable which resolves or reject with the validation error or null, right? Now since we are dealing with the multiple observables here, so fork join response will be the array of errors or null. So we should merge it into a single error object of type validation errors. For that we will have to pipe it with the map operator, right? And we will basically pass this merge error function, which will consolidate the array of errors into a single error object. Now we will have to define this, what it is going to do. And it is the same thing which we are doing here in the synchronous validations also, right? So we made use of reduce here to reduce the array of errors into a single error object. So actually we can reuse this method here as well. And instead of doing this, what we can do, we can call merge errors, and we can pass the errors here. Okay, and we can get rid of this from here. Let's import the map operator. So now we will have to define this merge errors utility. So yeah, let's create one more utility here. Merge errors which accept the errors. So this is an array of validation errors or null, right? And what it will return, it will return a validation errors, single validation error object. Okay, so what we do here, first we define like our errors, which is going to be of type key of type string, and value can be anything, and we give it an empty. Okay, so rename this variable to result, which we are going to return, right? All right, so now what we do, we will have to iterate over all the validation errors, and if it is a null value we can ignore it, and if it is a validation error we can merge it into this single object, right? So let's iterate over the validation error. So let's make use of for of loop, error of errors, and if we have the valid error object, then what we can do, we can simply assign that to the response. So what we do, we spread the response and we can then spread our error. So this way we can keep merging all the error objects into a single error object, right? And at last what we can do, we can check if we have any errors inside this error object, if we have any keys, right? So object is a key value pair, so if we have any keys in the in our result object, we can simply return the result as it is. So object dot keys, we will have to check the length of the array, right? Yes, so we have the errors present in the response object, and we can simply return the results object as it is, otherwise we can return null. Okay, this can return validation errors or null, right? So we are returning null as well here, so annotate the return type accordingly. Now let's go back and check if it is working fine. Also we will have to make some changes in the form control, in the abstract control. So form control extend this class, right, which tracks the value, validity, errors, everything. and this class will be extended by all other form model APIs like form, group, form array, form record, everything. Now here if you check the calculate status, so we have to update it a bit. So basically we should not make all these checks here. So we should only check if we have the errors, it is invalid, otherwise it is valid. Okay, yeah, nothing is breaking here. So first let me check if my synchronous validation is working fine. Yeah, it is working fine. Great. Now let's see if our async validation, how is our async validation working here. So for that what we will do, first we will have to call the async validation, right? So go back to the ngModel. So now since we have our async validator function ready, composed validator function is ready, so we will have to apply it on the form control also, right? So we will have to define another method which will accept the async validation, right? So let's define it, name it async validator function. If you go back to the flow diagram where we are now, we are at this step. So we define the directive, register it on this di token ng async validators. Then we injected this di token and get access to the array of validation directives we have applied on the form element. Then we composed a single validator function from the array of injected validation directives. And now it's the time to assign that single validator function to the form control. So we are going to make some changes to accommodate the async validation in the form control, in the abstract control. Okay, so this is our, yes. So now let's define one more property here. Let's copy it. So this is going to be our async validator, async validator function, and this is going to be of type async validator function. Okay, and let's import it as well. So it will simply assign it, capture it here, change here as well. All right, now since we have added the support of async validator in the abstract control, so what we will do, we will simply check if we have the async validator, if we have any async validation directive applied over here, then we must be preparing this function. So if we have this function, simply access the control, underlying control created by the ngModel, and call the method at async validator and pass this composed async validator function. That's it. Okay, so here will be composed async validator function. All right, now let's come to the point where we actually invoke that validator function. So if you go back to the form control, so there is another class form control. So this is the instance which we create in the ngModel, right? And ngModel basically calls the set value whenever it sync the updated value with the form control. It will call the set value method, and which eventually call the updated value and validity, and which actually calculate the error and the status. So basically, so these two functions are running the synchronous validation, right? And we should always run the async validation once our sync validation is passed, right? Because async validation is there is no point executing the async validation when your sync validation is failed, because it is supposed to be costly. It might require making an API call and some other async operation. So first check that we should have here is like, if the status is valid, means we have checked all the sync validation, and they are supposed to be passed at this point. So now we can call our async validation. So basically we can call something like run async validators, right? So now let's define this another private method, run AsyncValidator, and what this will do, so it will call our uh, AsyncValidator function, and it will pass it the control, right? And this can return us what? Okay, so we should, yeah, so what it is saying like object is possibly null, means our AsyncValidator function can be null as well, right? So we should put a check over here if we have the async validation in place, right? Only then we will call it. All right, so what it returns, it returns us the promise or an observable, right? So we will have to make an assertion here like this is going to return us the observable, which might return with the validation errors or null, right? If we don't do this, uh, if we don't do this, let's remove it once, and then the TypeScript is not aware of like if it is a promise or if it is a observable. So that's why there is no suggestion for the methods of the observable, right? So we will have to add this assertion here manually, and then it will suggest all the observable properties. All right, so now pass the callback here. So what we get here, we get here the results. Okay, so this result is something like it can be validation errors or null, right? So what we are going to do here, so let's make some changes before we write the actual code. So basically when your async validation starts, so we have to update the status to pending, right? So now there is one more status here with the async validation, and that is pending. So the form control goes into the pending state when we enter the async validation. Okay, and define one more constant here. Okay, so before we invoke the async validator function, let's update the status to pending. Okay, now once this validation observable is resolved, so errors is actually the response, right, which we can assign directly, and we can calculate the status thereafter. Okay, so we have updated our errors as well as our status. Now let's go to your app component, and here we will define one more div to show the async validation errors on the first name. So we have already applied this directive here, forbidden names. Okay, remove this message first, and here we check for the error forbidden names. Okay, and the error message will be please, okay, we can say this name is not allowed. All right, so let's check it once if it is working. And also there is one more thing, we can give the user some hint like some async validation is going behind the scenes. So we can make use of the pending state of the form control. Okay, and we can show and hide this div, and we can have some message here, something like uh, validation, validating the name, and we can give it a class something like text warning, and we show this message only when when we have the state as this is pending, so we have to define this property on the form on the ngModel. So you see ngModel expose some key information from the form control, right? So we can export this flag which tells about whether our form control is in pending state or not. Okay, so if it is pending, then the status is pending, it is in the pending state. All right, go back to the template. Okay, we're getting it. All right, now let's go back. Now you will see the validation, the async validation won't be fired until these two validations are satisfied, right? So first one is satisfied, the second one is also satisfied. Now we should have our third validation here, but it is not working. So let's debug why our async validation is not working, right? So our synchronous validations are working fine. So we have two type of synchronous validation. One is the required, another is min length of 3 characters. So it is working fine, but if I enter this name, which should be a forbidden name as per the validation, no error is shown and nothing, and no visuals are shown for the pending states. Okay, so let's debug it. So when I checked through the code, I found some issues in our implementation. So these are like errors which you normally make when you are doing the live coding. So first thing, we have not called the AsyncValidator method yet, right? Which we have defined. So we have to call this method set AsyncValidators. Only then it will set up this validator function, right? Okay. And so now it will compose this validator function and we will set it on the underlying form control. Okay. Another thing is like there is some mistakes here in the app component also. When we define our directive, we are returning the value as it is here, but in promise we should make use of this method resolve or reject, right? So this is another mistake. I thought if you have been vigilant enough, you must have not like catch these errors while I was coding. Okay. Another thing is the errors which we are referencing in the template, that is forbidden names, not forbidden name. So we should update here as well, forbidden names. Now let's check if it is working fine. Sakshi is a valid name. Why it is giving us this error? All right. Again, I'm sorry. So it is actually null here, right? If Tom is the name we enter, then it is a error. Otherwise, it is a forbidden name. Tom is a forbidden name. Else, all the names are allowed. So it should be null. Okay. So now let's see how it behaves. So yes. So first of all, two synchronous validations are executed and they are shown here accordingly as per the data. Now, as soon as these are satisfied, it will validate our name with the async validation which we have applied, and it give us back the correct error message. Now suppose I make a change here, let's say Tom or Tommy, it will validate again. Yeah, so no error message. So I guess it is working fine now. Okay, so yeah, so we have achieved everything which we discussed in this flow diagram. So let's refactor our ngModel class to make it more lean, and we can extract away the common methods, common getter functions into a separate class, that is AbstractControl directive. Now I'll tell you what all things I'm going to extract. So first of all, create the AbstractControl directive. Okay, so this is our AbstractControl directive. Any of the class, any of the child class extending this should define this property, that is control, okay, of type AbstractControl. Now from the ngModel, what all things we need to extract? First of all these getter functions we can extract easily and put it there, right? Now why we need to make this control as abstract, because this class will provide some validation flags which are read from the control. So ngModel basically has already created this. So what ngModel can do? ngModel can simply extend this class AbstractControl directive. Okay. Now through ngModel we will have access to all the flags. Another thing is, yeah, so we will have to call the super keyword here. Another thing which we can put here, no, like ngModel create the instance of form control, ngModel group directive, it will create an instance of form group, right? And form group and form control, they all extend the abstract control class, which gives us all these flags, status and errors and everything, right? So it's always good to keep your code dry by extracting away the common things in your base classes and make the required fields as abstract. Okay, so we can also do one thing, we can extract these methods as well, right? So because we will have to apply the validation not only on ngModel but also ngModel group and ngForm. So we can put the validation also at common place. So I'll extract both these methods here and put it here. Okay, and import all the missing things. Okay, so now one more thing, we will have to define all these properties here now, composed. So let's put them here. So let's define these two properties now, make them private. Okay, okay, so here we are getting some errors. Okay, so we don't have access to these now because these are private properties coming from the base class. Okay, so instead of giving these, we can define the getters to access our sync and async validator functions. So first will be the validators, which will give back the composed validator function, and for the async validators we can have this property which will give back the async validators, composed async validators. Okay, and instead of referencing this, what we can do, we can refer the validators okay, and in place of here we can have our async validators. Now let's see if everything is fine. Yeah, it seems everything is fine. Now you can see this is much leaner now. So we have everything which is common in the abstract control, and anything specific is in the ngModel, so that these things can be shared across multiple classes. So since now we are working with ngModel, now when we start working with the ngModel group, which validates a group of form controls, you will see how we make use of these. All right, and also we can do one more thing, we can create one more file here inside our form source and name it validators.ts. okay, and here we can keep everything like the actual validations like min length required and everything, right, at one place, so that we can reuse them when we develop the reactive forms also, right? So this utility is related to the validation, so I'll keep it here and format it. Also I guess we can keep it as well, although we can have it in a different utility file, but for now we can keep it here. Let's format it. And one more thing, okay, so we will have to remove this now and re-import. Okay, one more thing, if you go to the directive validators.ts under the directives folder, here also we have some things related to the validation, and we have some utilities, we can extract them there, like null validator, required validator. So these things can be reused in the reactive forms also, right? So why not keeping them there? So we can extract all this from here, also the min length. Okay, just put everything here, put everything here. This is min length, this is required, and keep them together, and these can be put here, the utilities. Okay, so this is null validator, required validator, and min length validator. So for now we are using them in the template driven validations, but these will be easily reused in the reactive forms also. And this is how Angular also organize it, right? Now import everything which is missing. Let's check if everything is okay, anything is breaking. Yeah, go to the validator directive also, and we have to import all the missing imports here. Yeah, I guess it is fine now. Yeah, so this validator.ts under the directive, this is also optimized, so it has only the validation directives. Let's test our code again. Yes, the validations are working fine, and let's keep eye on the console as well. Yes, so let's enter something here. Yeah, it is working fine. It should be invalid name. Yeah, this name is not allowed. It is fine. So this seems to be working. So that's all from this video, and you saw how we implemented the support of an async validation in our ngModel directive. I hope you liked it, and just share your feedback in the comment section, and let's see you in the next video. And let me give you a hint what we are going to cover in the next video. Basically, you see, whenever I'm typing anything, there is this async validation firing, right? And this is very unoptimized, right? This is costly actually. Now since we are not making an API call, we just making a promise, creating a promise and resolving it within 2 seconds. But in real world, you will be making the API calls to validate your data, and if you are firing the API call on every keystroke, this is highly unoptimized. So that's why Angular provides something like on change hook, okay, which can pass along with your ngModel configuration, and which will basically delay the async validation to the point when you blur from the input. So only then it will fire the async validation, and that will basically optimize it, right? So you will see that in the next video. Until then, goodbye, take care, thank you.